Well, yes, thank you all for coming today, and I think it's important to start out. I'm going to pick up right where Laura left off, and that is talking about the victims, because one of the things that I've found very frustrating in this story is that already the 11 people who died in the Deepwater Horizon have largely been forgotten. When I hear the debate going on about whether we should be drilling in the Gulf, what regulations we need to have, the one thing that everybody seems to forget about is that 11 people died just a little over a year ago in this accident. And you know, it's a rare thing as a business writer to get to write about human tragedy on this level. Usually we're writing about more mundane things like corporate strategy and things like that. And what was really interesting to me as a writer was that this was a great example of how all those kind of ephemeral business decisions that get made affect people on a very, very human level. And one of the things in the front of my book, I actually put a list of the victims that have died in various BP-related accidents since 2000, and both in Texas City and on the Deepwater Horizon. And I actually started, I put together the list of the Deepwater Horizon victims very early on in this process, and I pretty much either looked at it or thought about it every day. I had it on a separate piece of paper with all my materials. And then, of course, as I worked through things, I began expanding the list, and it was really kind of disturbing how the list kept growing. You know, you kept finding, oh yeah, there was this accident. Oh, there was this one. And in fact, since I've done the book, somebody pointed out to me there was a fatality in Alaska that I don't have on this list. And so, you know, it really kind of reminded me of why I was writing this book and why it mattered. This wasn't just a business story. It wasn't just a story of a company that didn't handle a crisis well. It was a story that affected people's lives, and you know, most of the guys who were killed in that rig had young families. They have, you know, children that many of them haven't even reached elementary school yet, and they're going to grow up without fathers. And so, you know, it is something that really makes you stop and think. And back in April, when we had the one-year anniversary, I actually interviewed some of the widows and some of the family members, and it's you know, they're not going to forget about it, and so I think it's important that none of us do either as we have these discussions about you know, what needs to be done. As I started working on the book, it became very clear that you know, when you're trying to write a long narrative like this, you look for themes, and I had a discussion with a VP executive who obviously didn't want to be named, and so I'm not going to name him now, but we were kind of talking about the different things that had happened at BP, the different accidents, going back to the Grangemouth refinery explosion in 2000, and how so many of these reports kind of pointed to the same root causes, and yet nothing seemed to change. And he finally got really kind of quiet because he was about to break with the company line, and he said, you know, it's the culture. It's this culture that we can't seem to change. And I left that meeting thinking, great, now I got to write about culture, right? This is not exactly a writer's dream. But it really is about the culture and about the tone that companies set within their operations. And I was just saying earlier that I was off on a rig last summer, and I was talking with some guys at a different drilling company about how they approach safety. And one of the things, there was a vice president who was going around with us, and he said, you know, our CEO gets on the earnings calls every quarter, and the first thing he talks about is safety. And he said, you know, the analysts don't really care about safety. They're not interested in hearing this. They've heard it a million times, but he does it every quarter. And he doesn't do it because the financial community cares. He does it because he knows some of his employees are dialing in, listening to that call. And so every time he speaks, he's reiterating this message of what's important to everybody in the organization. That didn't happen at BP. I'm not convinced that it's happening now. But let me. I'm going to read to you a little portion from the book, and this was actually from chapter 4, which became one of the chapters I was most proud of, I guess, in the way it came together, because I originally didn't have it in the outline, and I realized that I had gone from setting up this idea of John Brown as this visionary CEO who had put this company together to jumping right into the problems in Texas City. And what I didn't have was any way to sort of show the broader issues that the company was dealing with. Fortunately, I found this young man in London named Oberon Houston, who was in their, what they call the Challenger program at BP. It was a way of fast-tracking young executives up to the top. And he was actually working on the 40s Alpha platform back in the early 2000s, and had an interesting story to tell. So let me, I'm going to read a little bit. Hopefully this won't bore you too much, but I think it kind of shows this cultural issue that I'm talking about.